Blog Talk Radio.
Live from the nation's capital, it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry, with host Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
My special guest tonight is Gabrielle Oliver. Gabrielle, are you with me?
Yes, I am. Thank you for having me.
Well, great. I'm glad you're here. Question for you. What is poetry?
Yes. Poetry to me is a form that is able to encompass a lot of art in a very short form. I think that poetry is a written form that can do things that fiction can do, and autofiction and all these different things. But poetry also has the ability to encompass, visual art, can encompass and utilize music and countless different forms. And in that way, I think that poetry is able to stretch itself and communicate feeling, themes in a very short but very, I would say, strong and powerful way.
All right. Why is it important? Maybe you just answered that question, but just more detail. Why is it important?
I think that poetry is important because historically I think that poetry is really great at placing time markers for different historical events or periods of time. Because poetry is packed with so much and so little, words or space on the page, you're able to look at something and research, okay, when were they using this word and point in time in history, and why is this place important, or why is this person mentioning this event? I think that poetry is so important because it's able to communicate a lot in so little.
Please share one of your works.
Okay, I'm going to start with a poem called Call to Cutting, and it has an epigraph by Zadie Smith that reads, "The truth is, the family is always a vent of some violence. Slice yourself into sections, pieces, places where they divide you from humanity. The ghetto, live and be breathing consciously with a knife on your throat. Press to your skin in the fragments of pain, violent events that drain you of your own blood." And I'll read the other version since it's a contrapuntal poem. Slice yourself to pieces, you from the ghetto, and be breathing with a knife pressed to your skin in violent events, in sections, places where they divide humanity, live consciously on your throat, the fragments of pain that drain you of your own blood. End.
When you think about the body of your work, what are some of the predominant themes?
I would say the predominant themes in my work are family, definitely genealogy and ancestry, but also the fact that human beings have multiple identities, that we're not just where we come from, where we live presently, where we go to school, we're our friends as well. And so I like to encompass kind of the multiple identities, especially when it comes to my experience and my time living in Japan, and people who have multiple identities there but sometimes are fragmented a little bit into not, being able to have those identities. So I like to explore that in poetry as well.
All right, very nice. Now, how does a poem begin for you? With an idea, a form, or an image?
I think that poems definitely originate with an idea. Me, I love form poetry so much. I love, kind of having a set parameters for words or whatever lines it may be in a poem. So definitely for me it starts with an idea or a theme or a form or something of that nature, so that once that's figured out, I can figure out what I'm going to write a lot easier.
All right. Now, when you sit and write, do you think through every word of every stanza, or do you write freely and allow the words to just flow?
That's a very good question. I think that in my experience, it can be either or. Sometimes I do sit through every word of every stanza, especially if I'm in a tight form like haiku or something of that nature that's, only, a couple syllables per line. That way I definitely do have to think about every word of every stanza. But and other times I do like to, and I think when I'm writing more freely or kind of free verse, then I do like to allow the words to flow naturally.
Right. Let's take a brief break and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I'm here with Gabrielle Oliver. If you'd like to call in and ask Gabrielle a question, the call-in number is 646-787-1631. Gabrielle, please favor us with another one of your poems.
Absolutely. So this next poem I'm going to read is the Tanaka series. So it's a series, 11-part of these short Tanaka poems, which are basically extended haiku. So 2 extra lines on a haiku. So I'll start with this Tanaka series. 1. For ceilings that leak, funneling her tears through valves of rusted gutters, it's lugging wet leaves into your esophagus that swells encumbered by fault. 2. For third marriages, she should have figured out of her discerning gift a white dress, woven without infatuating of being married. 3. For girls with acne, your face will gleam with oil, glinting from healed pores, deep and rich with dirt, soil to grow, stealing eyes of all your admirers. 4. For treating vergatures, stretched past desire, he construes your body's lines, reveals naked words on your skin. He holds, finds your unread pages with his hands. 5. For men, where will they drop dead? Will they be safe under sheets? Will they be passing on streets, make their way back home? Will they put guns to their heads? 6. For cherry trees, you are the soul, the single tree rooted with outspoken blossoms in spiritual realms. The world waits, you elude it. 7. for false predictions. It was supposed to fall into bloody hands, snap from certainty, and turn into helpless thoughts of us, a broken people. 8. For my father. When you mock part of the tongue that is your daughter's, is their mother too, hysterical and laughing, they will carve out their own mouths. 9. For popping cherries. When I go picking, I score. The point of my thumb through red, ripe tissue, wipe my stained hands, shaker 'cause it's a sight, seeing seed fall. 10. For time wasted. They are being tossed around the eyes of men who have long stared past them off to be superficial in all their admiration. 11. For understanding guitarist. His fingers must have been consistent, relentless even, behind closed bedroom doors, with women he renamed out of obsession. End.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
All great writers have great writing influences. Who are some of yours, and what makes them great in your eyes?
This is my favorite question.
Right.
I love, so the writers I love, the first that comes to mind is my mentor at the University of Kentucky, Frank X. Walker. He's won 2 NAACP Image Awards for his collection Turn Me Loose, The Unghosting of Medgar Evers, a civil rights activist, and it's an incredible collection. He's, just a great writer, and he's given me so much to work with, and he's helped me evolve my writing so much. Another person that comes to mind is Tahimba Jess. I love what he's done with the contrapuntal form and creating things that read different ways and poems that can read in columns and rows and backwards and sideways and all these, interesting ways of reading poems. I think that is the coolest thing ever, which is why I'm always trying to write more like him. And third, I would say Natasha Trethewey. I absolutely love her, poet laureate of the U.S. 2 times. I love her work so much, so powerful, and people always say, writing about family is so boring, but the way she writes about her mother is absolutely touching, and I think it's anything that her work is something that anyone can feel, even if they haven't experienced what she has, which I think is what poetry tries to do.
As you think about your past, as you think about being a poet, when did you first start writing poetry, and what made you feel the need to express yourself in this way?
This is an interesting question, too. I think I started...
That's why the people keep coming back.
Right, exactly. I started writing poetry really when I started journaling, and I didn't really know what I was doing at first. I remember I was in the 5th grade, and my tutor, a family friend of mine, a babysitter, gave me this jean material covered journal, and it's the strangest thing. I still have it somewhere tucked in, my closet somewhere, but it's I started journaling, and after years of journaling, I just thought to myself, well, why am I writing so plainly if, as if someone's going to read this? Why don't I try to make this more abstract or talk in terms that only I will understand? So in that way, I think my journaling kind of became poems. I started, to be a little more abstract and purposeful with my words, and in that way I started kind of perfecting poetry on my own, and it wasn't until I was in college that I took a formal class, but and to my surprise, my professor was like, whoa, like you should, apply for grad school, and I was like, what? Are you serious? But I'm just so grateful for, my professors and my teachers inspiring me, and I'm just glad that I always had, writing, and I think that writing helped me get through a lot of things in my life that maybe if I didn't have a page, I probably would have lashed out in other ways that aren't healthy for me or others around me. So
yeah, I can
I'm
understand.
glad I had that page.
Poets hail from all over the world. Where do you hail from?
Right. I hail from Washington, D.C., D.C. area. I always say D.C., but I'm really from Silver Spring, which is a little, not too far.
You're not from D.C.
But I'm not from D.C., I'm not. My family's from PG, from PG County, but I love this area. I think it's, the older I get, the more I grow to appreciate D.C., the D.C. area. I think that it's kind of like if New York wasn't as crazy, didn't have as many people, and but thankfully there's still a lot of great things to do, like the Smithsonian's, and which are free, and there's a lot of great monuments and things that I had the opportunity to visit that. It wasn't until I was 12 and started traveling other places that I realized that museums weren't free, which is really funny. But I do, I'm very appreciative of growing up in this area. And it's very diverse, I think, too, which is, also helpful for any kids, I think.
Well, so as you think about growing up in the D.C. area, how does that influence your work?
I think that the multiculturalness of this area definitely has influenced my work. It's made me less afraid to tap into my own ancestry and to ask questions of the people around me, of their experiences, and trying to write in their experiences and getting their opinions and ideas about different things, and especially the way they live their lives. I think that's the biggest difference between a lot of cultures is, just how people live their lives on a daily basis, and whether it's religion or some other sort of values that they have. And I think that growing up in this area has definitely helped me to understand that and understand how to write about that.
Please share another piece of your work.
Absolutely. So this next poem I'm going to read is called Zanenda, which means what a shame in Japanese. And the epigraph reads, my grandfather, measuring and comparing my Japanese tongue to that of 2018 Grand Slam singles winner Naomi Osaka. It seemed like they were darting back and forth across the green, courting my country, those foreigners that looked nothing Japanese. When that gaijin girl's face was on NHK, filled every slot in the rising sun until late afternoon, I thought she looked identical to the one we'd been housing and feeding for spring. Both had that unfathomable reddish brown, as if they'd been burned, worked outside for too long, hardly feminine. The icon, the dark spot on our flag, the one who'd spent longer outside, was supposed to have more of our blood, was supposed to act like us, but could not understand an interviewer from her own birthplace, nor could she say much more than, sorry, I don't know, could not say hello and thank you like a woman should. Even that one of no relation to me, fruit of a past marriage's mistake, with rotten skin, could speak better than that. What a shame. End.
You're extremely skillful with your work. Do you think that you were meant to be a poet?
I think I was. I think that just the way in these last couple of years these doors have swung open for me, whether it was working with Nikki Giovanni for a week and studying with her, or whether it was even my professors at Howard telling me, hey, like, you need to consider an MFA program, and me never having considered grad school, let alone MFA program, like, what? Are you crazy? I think that just the opportunities that have presented themselves to me with writing in, these past couple of years is kind of proving to me that, I am meant to be a poet and I am meant to be a writer, and as much imposter syndrome, as you can imagine, I have experienced. But,
I understand the imposter syndrome. Yes.
Right, exactly. But I'm very thankful, and I think that if anything, it's just humbling, being able to be around the people that I'm around at school or in other places.
Where do you go to write? You have a favorite place?
I would say my favorite place to write is on my couch. Sometimes going outside is nice as well, but it's nice for me at least being in a controlled environment, and being able to set up some music or something to listen to softly in the background. And really funny thing that I recently shared with some of my writing friends that a lot of them were surprised to hear, but I have different notebooks. I have about 7 different notebooks dedicated to different subjects. So one's about school, one's about love, one's about social life, other one's about spirituality and these sorts of things. And I have a whole bunch of journals that I will write in different topics. So I definitely like to crack one of those open if I recently experienced something or am feeling inspired in one of those areas. So definitely my couch in my home is my favorite place to write.
As you think about poetry and you in your studies, what are some of the most prevalent ingredients that go into the concoction we call a poem? What makes up a poem?
That is probably the greatest question anyone could ask of poetry. I think we're all trying to figure that out all the time. But in my experience, I think that what makes a poem so great is its ability to connect with others. And so when I'm writing, I'm trying to be cognizant of that. I'm trying to be cognizant of my reader. I'm trying to play with sound or image. I'm trying to create these really provocative images that'll stand out to the reader. And at the same time, I'm trying to tell a story. I'm trying to be truthful in some way and have some sort of form going on. So whether it be lines or whether it just be the look of the poem on the page. So for me, it's definitely a combination of those things. Sometimes it's more of some than the other, but in general, I think it's just trying to be cognizant of your reader and still trying to be truthful and interesting.
Okay. Share another of your works.
Okay. This next poem is called Story Seeding, Uprooting Peter Oliver, who is my great-great-great-grandfather. When I touched ground in Hardy, Virginia, I stood barefoot in dew-slick sod and severed muddy earth with my body's roots, planted toes in the dirt. Whiteness blinded my eyes, and I inhaled thick fog, past which could not be seen. So I combed my fingers through ratty roots, raked grass like hair, and pulled his story lengths away from unmarked graves and into the field of my vision. After I rid my head of men, many dead, locked up in black spirals out of control, I knew I would write Oliver's story into poems that stretched themselves back to converse with my ancestors and up again to all of his descendants. End.
I like that poem.
Thank
you sent
you.
that to me. It's a very powerful piece, and it brings up so much. Just in terms of history, it really, really does. We're going so much. Well, yes, we're going through so much in this country right now. Things that we've never gone through before. What do you think is the role of a poet in modern day society? How can we help?
That's a great question. I think that the role of a poet in modern society is really to be truthful, and I think I said that probably a couple times in other questions randomly.
That's okay.
But
that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's how I feel when I write. Whether it's about myself, whether it's about my ancestors, whether it's about my friends or whoever it may be, a historical figure that I'm writing about, I'm always trying to be truthful. You know, I'm trying to be truthful about the things that happen to them, the things that they experience. And I think that the role of a poet is expressing other people's truths in their lives and the things that they've gone through so that other people can learn from them and learn, the experiences of others.
Let's take a brief break and we'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, we are back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I'm here with Gabrielle Oliver. Gabrielle, question for you.
Yes.
All right. Writers and poets write for a myriad of reasons. Some write primarily to speak a message to their audience. Others write because to stay silent is not an option. Why do you write?
I think that I definitely agree a little more with the latter. I think that silence definitely is not an option and I think that some stories deserve to be heard. I think some stories are not presented as important or not known to the general public, and I think that poetry is able to help tell some of those stories. So I think I agree a little more with the latter. Definitely, art for art's sake is great and incredible, and sometimes even for myself or yourself, I'm sure people, we like to write poems for ourselves sometimes.
Yes.
But
yes.
I definitely feel that at least in my experience, I think that there's a certain sort of calling placed upon writers, and that we have a sort of mission in dedication to telling stories, whether they be ours or the people around us or people that have passed.
Have you ever been published?
Yes, I have. Recently in 2019, I was published in the spring issue of a Gathering Together literary journals publication, and I have a couple poems, 3 poems published with them, and it was my first, time I was ever published, this past year, so that was very exciting.
Oh, yes, I'm sure. So if you were given an opportunity, let's say you published a book, you given opportunities to do book signings anywhere that you wanted, what cities or countries would you definitely want on your book tour?
That is a great question. I think that for these are great questions every time they hit. I think that right now I'm working on a collection of poems about my great-great-great-grandfather, Peter Oliver, and he was from the Winston-Salem area, North Carolina. So I definitely would put North Carolina. Yes, I would definitely place them on the map. Of course, D.C., New York as well. Just there's so much, writing happening in these cities. So those are some places I would definitely place on a book tour.
Another of your works, please.
Of course. So this poem is called Free in 1810. And it's titled that because this was the year that my great-great-great-grandfather, Peter Oliver, he was previously purchased illegally, and he was able to read and write English and German because of the church community he belonged to in 1800, and so he presented his documents related to his illegal purchase in a court in 1810 and received his freedom. And so there's this epigraph that begins with, I will agree to your terms, but you must give me a guarantee of security because the Bible commands it. Peter Oliver to the Moravian Church, 1788. Free in 1810 means signing the conditions of your existence, closing your house to outside Negroes, informing the Church of Negro conspiracies, paying rent. Free in 1810 mean hearing Salem officials say, you are not so poor as you always like to appear. Free in 1810 mean breathing underground for clay, mean fishing for coins with your teeth, mean breaking the surface with dirt in your mouth, mean shaping bricks in the space of your jaw, mean spitting out buildings, mean wondering where your money is, mean carving pipe stems 2 cents apiece, mean asking where your money is, mean using a reed you made to play the waiting game, mean coughing up blood, mean following up on where your money is, mean fighting the cost of living with bad lungs, mean paying rent with your life. End.
That was deep. As I listen to you, as you share the titles of your poems, they seem to be amazingly detailed titles. What role should a title play in a poem?
I think that the title might be one of the hardest parts about writing any sort of poem. I think that titles have to be sort of clever, but what I notice in workshopping my poems and, being in an MFA program, sometimes you don't want the title to be that clever because then it's kind of, a little, too playful or funny or trying to be comical. So I think that when you're writing the title of a poem, I think that it should communicate something in your work, but perhaps not too much so you don't give too much away. So it's a little difficult, and usually I think I wait till the end of a poem to title.
So if you had to share with a beginning poet about thinking about a title, titling their work, what would you share? What would you share?
I would tell them, I think the first thing I would say is don't try to give too much away. I would say think of something subtle. Think of something maybe that is a little smaller in the poem, or maybe by creating a title for the poem that mentions that thing that's really subtle, gives it more light and more attention, and that way shows more of the intentionality of your work. So that's the advice I would give them.
All right, very nice, very nice. All poets have several words that come up over and over and over again, words or sentences they just can't help but use in their work. What are 3 of your absolute favorite words to use?
I think that dream is definitely a word that comes up a lot. Free or freedom is one that comes up a lot. And I think just the word I, whether it's my perspective or the perspective of the person, whoever's speaking in the poem.
All right. Why those 3 words?
I think those 3 poems are connected so deeply to my writing. I think I is definitely such a big one. It's because I write so much persona poetry, which is always in the perspective of the person that's speaking in the poem. So if I'm, writing a persona poem about my ancestor or writing one about George Washington or whoever it may be, I think that I is something that definitely and always will, place a significance on the speaker. I think that freedom comes up a lot, especially lately because I'm working on this collection of poems about my great-great-great-grandfather, Peter Oliver, and so much of his life is placed on this really interesting story of a man who was enslaved by various people for his skills in pottery and crafting buildings and bricks and these sorts of things. And he was able to acquire so much education on his own that he was able to find fault in the law with his purchase and then receive his freedom in court legally, which was very, unheard of in 1800s. So,
it sounds like it, yes.
Right. So I think that a lot of when I'm thinking about him or his story, the word freedom is very important, and even kind of the letdown of freedom, like his rent being obscenely high and different other, harsh realities that were placed on him because he was a freed man in an enslaved, southern area of the United States.
Wow. I asked earlier about your favorite poets that you're drawn to. Name a few of your favorite historical poets as you think about history. What about their work draws you, and what about their work inspires you? Why are you drawn to them?
I think that some historical poets I'm drawn to, well, very obviously, I think that the Odyssey, so a lot of Homer's poetry, the Odyssey, the Iliad. I was such a huge fan of Greek mythology and Roman mythology in middle school and high school that I ended up taking Roman and in high school and was able to learn and translate different texts. And I think that these stories, these heroic passages are just very interesting and fun to navigate, as they're stories that a lot of us are familiar with, but in reading you learn a lot. I think that another very interesting one that I didn't read fully until college was Beowulf, and also Frankenstein. We always think Frankenstein is the dead, pieced together man, but Frankenstein is actually the doctor, right, who creates him. So just learning about these stories and how you can see, modern portrayals of stories or writing kind of model themselves after heroes or the outcast, which is kind of like Frankenstein's monster. I think these stories place a sort of interesting interpretation of, heroes or what's good and bad, different values we see are present, and how the societies at that time valued them. So those are probably some of my favorite historical poems and pieces.
All right. As we stick with the theme of history, this is Women's History Month. How do you believe being a woman has impacted your craft?
I think that being a woman has impacted my craft in a very significant way because at no point in my life was I not a woman, right?
Right. That is true.
I think that's the thing about being a man or being a woman. You're always who you are constantly. And so there's no part of me that can't enter a room and not be a woman. There's no part of me that can't write and not show that. I think that whether it's my speaking mannerisms or where I come from or how I write, I think some of that is always going to show itself. And there are very unique experiences to women. And sometimes, I'll check in with friends or family or my mom or someone and say things like, isn't it crazy how women always get catcalled? I can't even count the amount of times this has happened to me or this has happened. And, other women will say the same thing. They're like, yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you if I tried, So different experiences, I think, are very unique and distinct to the experience of womanhood. And there's different struggles for men and women. I think that women's history is not just speaking to the injustice that we've overcome, but also to the light and special care that we're able to bring to situations and spaces.
Very nice. Nicely stated. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
We are back. Gabrielle, please share another of your poems.
All right. This poem is called Solmal for Sambo. And Sambo was an enslaved man from the Gambia region. And he worked with my great-great-great-grandfather, Peter Oliver, readily and worked with him in crafts. And there's this epigraph to the poem by Moravian Bishop August Spangenberg in 1760 that reads, "Because of our love to them, we do not free them, for they would be in a worse condition if they got free as if we kept them. Actually, they are not slaves with us, and there is no difference between them and other brothers and sisters. These people, uncut, come to retrieve us. These people, uncut, pull us out of the bush. These people, unscarred, with faces unburnt. These people, unscarred, are people, not warriors. I will make them warriors, teach them stories of elders, discard of their skin, bring them all before God. I will make them protectors of women, tell them why we fight, show them how to cut their own tongues. Watch flesh fly, watch their flesh fly, watch the knife carve, watch the whip, watch how, watch it make flesh fly, watch how it make a man. Where is my mother? Where is my wife, my child, my skin? I must leave them to become a man. I become a man to leave them. They will not go home the same way they came. They will not go home the same. They will not go home. They will not. I will not go home the same way I came. I will not go home the same. I will not go home. I will not. And this is the erasure part of the poem. Uncut people pull us, warriors. I make warriors, elders, protectors of women, cut their tongues, watch how it make a man, mother, wife, child, skin. I leave them to become a man. They will go home. They will go home. They will go home. They will. I will not go home. I will not go home. I will not go home. I will not. End.
What makes a poem good?
I think that what makes a poem good is its relatability to the audience. I think what makes a poem good is its mixture of sound, its mixture of different literary elements, whether it be metaphor, simile, image, allusion, illusion. I think that poetry is good when it mixes these, more concrete literary elements with theme, and those things are able to connect with the reader. I think that's when a poem is successful.
All right. Read another. I really enjoy your work. Please read another.
Oh, thank you. So this next poem I'll read is called Broken, Not Beaten. And it's for John. It's dedicated for John, who is Peter Oliver, so my great-great-great-grandfather's son. But it's also the name of my great-grandfather, so my grandfather's father. My eyes closed with the shop. When they opened into morning, I dreamed I was removed from my son 2 times, and the mere idea of dying again was so excruciating that my brain tried to escape my skull. Even 100 years after laying down brick for freedom's foundation, I still couldn't breathe. Something must have turned the wheels above me inside my headspace, something like an oily black hand, darker than usual, a self-driven carriage, oystered and hovering, or a great-grandson, laying back. But before it broke, free of restraints, it busted my face open at the center. I wondered what I would pass down to John besides skin. My fingers were skilled enough to translate trades, but was I so hard-headed that I could beat a falling car with my face? End.
Wow. They say that to see the world with complete honesty, one should look to comedians, artists, and poets. What do you think emerges naturally from your work? What emerges from you?
I think that family emerges from my work. I think that a dedication to history and telling the stories of ancestors emerges from my work. I think that telling the stories of people who have lived in the gray spaces of reality or the gray spaces of society, or places where spaces where they weren't, allowed to exist freely. I think those sorts of themes and ideas emerge from my work.
All right. Now, do you also have opportunities to write short stories or other pieces of literature?
Yes. It's interesting that you asked that. So right now, one of my courses in my MFA program, I'm writing a nonfiction piece, a memoir about my father. So it's a very interesting process, working in nonfiction, something that's very outside of my experience in poetry, but it's been very interesting, fun, and I think it's also been very telling to my own experience. And I think writing nonfiction is so great because it allows you to it's kind of like a cathartic experience. You're able to get some things out on paper, and once it's out, then you feel like it's over or it's done, which is a very good feeling.
All right. Please share another piece of your work.
Okay. So this is a poem called Revolution, and it's a dictionary form poem. So I have two definitions of the word revolution. Revolution. 1. Course of anything which returns to the point at which it began to move. In Salem, there is a revolution between Oliver and Peter. The scourge of the whip is a revolution repeated on Sambo's back. The scourge of the whip is a revolution, growing trees of runaway branches. 2. Rotation in general, returning motion. The turn of Oliver's wheel is a revolution spun into action by crankshaft in controlled pressure of slave masters. The turn of Oliver's wheel is a revolution, followed by throwing clay people up into vessels of labor. And
do you have opportunities to attend literary readings at all?
Yes, absolutely. So as part of the University of Kentucky's Creative Writing Program, we have a visiting writer series where we'll invite different writers from all over the country and new and upcoming writers. Some of them are older writers as well, and we'll invite them to read. So that's definitely a great example of some readings that I'm able to attend. But also, as a MFA candidate, I make a point to, in my school, thankfully helps us to achieve this as well. We'll definitely look for readings and conferences, related to readings or readings in the area to attend as well.
Right. Now, question for you. Are you on Facebook or Twitter? And if you're on Facebook or Twitter.
Facebook and Twitter.
All right. How does Facebook or Twitter fit into your writing life? How do they fit into your writing life?
I think that Twitter, more so for me, definitely feeds into my writing life. I think that Twitter, one of the greatest gifts I'll tell people of Twitter is Howard University's Twitter, and just the social realm of Howard University on Twitter has been the greatest gift I've ever received. I think that just being in communication with, the people that are still at Howard, the alumni of Howard, is just such an interesting thing. So many of us are artists. So many of us are either writers, filmmakers, etc., photographers. And I think that working with them, being connected to them, inspires me a lot. It inspires me to, look at so-and-so, look what they're doing. I need to pick up my journal too, or I need to pick up my notebook, or hearing news about some of my friends. It's inspiring. I think that there's a lot of great things going on. I think, thankfully we live in a time where, people are just starting, African Americans are just starting to be recognized in literary spaces and artistic spaces. So it's nice seeing those accomplishments when they happen, and I think they're very inspiring. So I think that Twitter definitely influences me in that way.
All right. You were talking about accomplishments. What do you measure has been a success as a poet? What is a measure of success as a poet? There we go.
Wow. You were asking the hard-hitting question. I think the measure of a success for a poet, I think that can be up to the poet themselves. Maybe if they just want to write a book, and that's their goal, just to write one single book, perhaps that is their accomplishment or greatest accomplishment. I think for me personally, I just would like to tell the truth freely and to share that with readers and for them to feel that impact to be able to receive that sort of recognition that, oh, you've told this story and you've done it and you've put in the research and we can read that through your poems. I think that for me would make me feel successful as a poet. But it would be nice to have, the more formal awards, like
accolades.
Poet Laureate, whether it be Poet Laureate of the state or the country, or have a Image Award or something like that. But, I can't ask for everything. But I think that really more generally, and what the work is about, for me at least, is just telling the truth. So if I'm able to have a reading somewhere after I publish a book and it's closely tied to that community, and I read it and I see in their faces or in their questions or their responses that they agree with the work and they can see the work that I put into it and the time and the research, I think that would make me feel successful as a poet.
As you think about what you just shared, describe your relationship with poetry. How has it developed and changed throughout your life? Your relationship with this thing we call poetry.
Poetry for me, it began as catharsis. It began as strictly me trying to write out what was going on around me as an adolescent. I think this is a very confusing time for a lot of people, but for me,
yes.
It definitely was particularly, right? It was particularly confusing because of family and all these other elements, and I learned later that, wasn't the greatest environment to be in, but I'm thankful that I had the page. And so at that time, it was strictly cathartic and me just trying to challenge myself, seeing, how I can write things different ways that still made sense, or trying to be artistic or write like the people I'm reading in school. So that's how writing was for me, I would say, as a young adult. But over the years, and especially more recently, it's become very research heavy. It's become less about me, but more about the stories I'm trying to tell, more about, telling the truth, more about taking the time to reach out to different archives and spend hours sifting through, pages and pages and boxes of information so I can become an expert in, whatever subject that I'm trying to write about. I think that's definitely very important to me, and I see how some of my favorite writers have done it, and for me, I think I've learned from that, and I've tried to implement it myself.
We have time for one more poem, if you don't mind sharing.
Of course. So I have a poem called Movie Making. It's about my ex, so this is one of the poems that you write for yourself.
Okay.
Those are important. It's a contrapuntal poem, so it reads in columns and in rows, so I'll read it 2 different times. It's very short. Movie Making. In a flash of confidence, you captured me, mouth parted as if about to say something impertinent, churlish even. My call for space, though common in our ruffled sheet music, made sense. Told you all sweet nothings rot. Your body wanted satisfaction with motion pictures taken in my bedroom, and like that, our dynamic fell on a final bar line out of nowhere. And here's it in rows. In a flash of confidence, mouth parted as if impertinent, my call for space in our ruffled sheet music made all sweet nothings rot. Your satisfaction with motion in my bedroom and our dynamic fell on a final bar line. You captured me, about to say something churlish, even though common sense told you nobody wanted pictures taken like that out of nowhere. And
I think you're going to go far.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ingram. That makes me feel great. Thank you.
I really, really do. You dynamic writer. When people hear your work, I'm sure they want more. What's next for you as a poet? What's next for you?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on my thesis, which I plan to implement into a book, and it's going to be a book on my ancestor, Peter Oliver, and about his path through enslavement and freedom in the 1800s. So that's definitely my next big project.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. Like I said, again, so much is happening in the world, and you could be somewhere else, but you chose to be here, and I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ingram. I had a great time, and thank you for having me.
All right. To everyone listening, tune in next week. We'll be back. Thank you, and good night.